call now on the Honourable the Premier to grace us with prayers.
Good morning, colleagues. Let us pray. Almighty God, from whom all wisdom and power are derived, we beseech Thee so to direct and prosper the deliberations of the Parliament now assembled, that all things may be ordered upon the best and surest foundations for the glory of Thy name and for the safety, honour, and welfare of the people of these islands. Bless our Sovereign Lady, Queen Elizabeth II, and all the royal family, Charles, Prince of Wales, and all the royal family. Give grace to all who exercise authority in our Commonwealth, that peace and happiness, truth and justice, religion and piety may be established among us. Especially we pray for the Governor of our islands, the Speaker of the Parliament, the Leader of the Opposition, members of the Cabinet, ex officio members, members of the Parliament, the Chief Justice, and members of the Judiciary, that we may be enabled faithfully to perform the responsible duties of our high office. All this we ask for in Thy great name's sake. Let us say the Lord's Prayer together. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be Thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespass, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For Thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. The Lord bless us and keep us. The Lord make His face shine upon us and be gracious unto us. The Lord lift up the light of His countenance upon us and give us peace, now and always. Amen.
This Honourable Parliament now resumes its sitting. Please be seated.
Administration of oaths or affirmations.
None.
Reading by the Honourable Speaker of messages and announcements.
Honourable members, today as we meet to conduct an important parliamentary business of our islands, we do so in full enjoyment of our Constitution, the rule of law, freedom, and democracy. These are tenets and principles which have been hard fought for by our predecessors, and it is our duty to ensure that we protect our parliamentary democracy for future generations to come. I make this statement because of the harsh reality facing some of our neighbors today. The unprecedented situation in our neighbor to the north, Cuba, is one which we must carefully observe, for we have many strong familial links and connections there, and history has taught us that similar uprisings have had a direct and severe impact on our community here. Let us remember the people of Cuba in our prayers as they face not political matters, but the savage matters of COVID. We have started a drive for assistance for Cuba. There are thousands of people in need, and we hope to have the cooperation of the Cuban government in getting supplies to the people, directly to the people that are in need thereof. This morning, I also wish to place on the record our profound shock and sadness at the assassination of a member of our CARICOM family, the President of Haiti, His Excellency Jovenel Moise, in an armed assault on his home during the early hours of Wednesday, the 7th of July, 2021, which also injured the First Lady, Her Excellency Martine Moise. While I did not have the pleasure of knowing him personally, I believe that some members of Parliament may have had an opportunity to meet and interact with him during regional CARICOM meetings in the past. Nevertheless, the people of Haiti, who seemingly have had no end to their national suffering, have been once again visited by tragedy, loss, and instability. I note that the Premier immediately issued an official statement extending sympathies on behalf of the government and people of the Cayman Islands, and that we join the region in lowering flags to half-mast for 3 days, and will again do so on the day of President Moise's funeral. Let us not be misguided into thinking that we are far removed from these problems. Our region is smaller than we think, and some would like us to believe that we are not part of this region. But colleagues, we are a part, have always been a part, and we can't get away from the familiar links that we have in our region. So we believe that a breakdown in the rule of law in our neighbors does not bode well for us. We are not as insulated from the fallout as one might hope. I have served here long enough. I have been a minister that have had to deal with these kinds of fallouts, and it didn't bode well for our social services. I therefore ask that prior to formal commencement of today's proceedings, that all members rise to observe a minute of silence as a mark of respect for the untimely passing of one of our regional leaders. May God continue to bless the people of Haiti, and may peace, justice, and indeed stability come to that weary, weary land. Let us rise for a minute. Please be seated. Thank you very much. Now for a more pleasant announcement. Honorable members, as I rise, it behoves me to recognize the Prime Minister of Jamaica, who has been appointed to the United Kingdom's Privy Council. As a personal friend and as the Speaker of this august House of Parliament, it is duly fitting and appropriate to publicly acknowledge this significant achievement. It gives me great pride and distinct pleasure to learn of his installment by Her Majesty the Queen to the Privy Council. Undoubtedly, accolades are in order, as his accepted form of address is now the Most Honorable Andrew Holness, ON, PC, MP, Prime Minister. It was commendable to have read that Her Majesty the Queen has been graciously pleased to approve that the Prime Minister be appointed a member of Her Majesty's Most Honorable Privy Council. Evidently, this sends a clear, strong, and convincing message of the caliber and erudite mind which the Privy Council seeks and will rely on for guidance and advice. The Prime Minister is beyond doubt a stalwart and a nation builder who will be able to analyze, distill, and deliberate on difficult issues which the committee may face and make cogent and rational decisions and recommendations for the better good of governance. These views and ultimate decisions by the Queen will be authoritative and mandatory within the perspective of Commonwealth territory and binding in some jurisdictions. It is worthy to mention that it has been an inordinate and protracted time, I should say, since a Prime Minister of the Caribbean has been appointed. It's a magnanimous and significant achievement at this time as the Prime Minister is now deemed an active member and participant of the body of officials and dignitaries chosen by the British monarch as an advisory council to the Crown. His influence and decisions can be far-reaching and has regional and international impact and potential global effect. I am confident he will serve judiciously. As the Most Honorable Prime Minister of Jamaica and as the representative of his people in a parliamentary democracy system based upon the British Westminster model and is a member of the British Commonwealth, he is highly respected and sought after in the Caribbean region, the wider diaspora, and throughout the Commonwealth. To that end, this appointment is a clear indication of his value and contribution to societies and influencing authorities to govern various jurisdictions. With his astute and reasonable mind, he will serve in that capacity profoundly with distinction. We are confident and equally proud that as a noble and honorable leader, he will represent the Caribbean region and the diaspora most admirably and in interest of all people. And I have sent a letter accordingly, as this message will also be sent on behalf of this honorable House. Now, members, for a more tedious message, but it is important as we meet the first time for business, and some members are not aware as yet of the rules and conventions of this House. So, honorable colleagues, today we begin our first business sitting. I wish to address several matters of procedures that are spelled out in our standing orders and in the rules and conventions of the orders of the House of Commons in the United Kingdom and other Commonwealth countries that we usually adhere to rules and convention. Our standing orders protect your right as members to debate, but there are constraints and rules to which you must adhere. The rules must be strictly followed no matter your opinion and the subject being debated. Debate must be relevant to the matters before the House. No one will be allowed to accuse or insult fellow members or the chair, not even with just one word, while standing, sitting, or speaking when called upon by the Speaker. The word coward, for instance, when spoken and directed to any member, whether on the backbench, government, or opposition, is a good example. Words spoken in this House, even if not repeated in the written Hansard, can damage and hurt, particularly in our small community. Members should be aware of the protection we have when speaking, because there is parliamentary privilege. But it is exactly that protection that dictates decency and truth, not speculation. And I repeat that, not speculation or heresy. It should be understood by everyone that ours is still not a sovereign parliament, but still a legislature with powers of representation. If a matter is not addressed in our local standing orders or our immunities, power, and privileges law, we must turn to the orders of the House of Commons of the United Kingdom and other such established parliaments to ensure conformity of parliamentary rules and control. Parliamentary privilege is the sum of the peculiar rights enjoyed by you as members of this honorable House, without which you could not discharge your functions. That privilege cannot and must not be abused. Members or those outside the House who disregard these rights and immunities are in breach of privileges and can be punished. This applies to the media and any other entity or person. The Parliament have the right to punish actions that obstruct or impede the Parliament in the performance of its functions and are contemptible offenses against its authority. These include disobedience to legitimate commands and do liable the House, its members, or its officers, which include the clerk and the sergeant at arms. The protection that absolute privilege gives must not be abused. Some people believe that it is not the duty of the media to publish accurate accounts of the House, but only the accounts that suits them. And we see that a lot of times in this country. No reasonable person would deny that some care must be taken by the media, lest it appears that food for gossip is being provided under legitimate guise. It is one thing to report debates of the Parliament as a matter of public interest, but it is quite another for the media to carry any irresponsible or scandalous words that may happen to fall from the lips of the members speaking in Parliament, whether they are relevant to the matter being debated or not. Doing so helps spread scandals across the islands which are without consideration of the victim. In my opinion, the media should act responsibly in these matters. If a member does abuse his privileges, not for making a real contribution to the question being debated, but as a license to speak irresponsibly about someone, and especially someone who has no standing here and cannot defend themselves, the media should not add to the wrong by casting open the windows of this House and letting the world know about it. Media that regards a man's reputation so lightly as to publicize charges of dishonesty or underhanded behavior of some kind without even the slightest evidence has little to complain about if made to make a substantial payment in redress to the courts. The same principle would apply if the words were recorded and subsequently ordered to be expunged and not available for rebroadcast or as a part of the written official report. It is the practice of the House to not publish scurrilous language used in debate. And even though we have immediate publication, those who are responsible ought to take being responsible and understand that when the chair says a matter is expunged, it is not carried by any media. Honorable members must observe standing orders, particularly rules of debate as found on page 24 of our standing orders at the beginning of section 32, ending at section 39 on page 27. I must ask you to pay very close attention to the enforcement orders, beginning at section 40 on page 27 and ending at section 41, subsection 14 on page 29, which I will take the time to read so one and all understand what enforcement under these orders mean. Section 40 says, and I quote, "The presiding officer is responsible for the observance of the rules of the order of the House and in the committees of the whole House respectively, and his decision upon any point of order shall not be open to appeal and shall not be reviewed by the House save upon a substantive motion made after notice." Section 41, which says, "The presiding officer, after having called the attention of the House or of a committee to the conduct of a member who persists in irrelevance or tedious repetition, either of his own arguments or of the arguments used by the other members may direct the member to discontinue his speech and to resume his seat. The presiding officer shall order any member whose conduct is grossly disorderly to withdraw immediately from the House during the remainder of the day's sitting and may direct such steps to be taken as are necessary to enforce that order. If a direction to withdraw under paragraph 2 is not complied with at once, or if on any occasion the presiding officer thinks that his powers under that paragraph are inadequate, he may name such member or members in the manner provided by paragraph 4 or 5. If a member shows disregard for the authority of the chair or abuses the rules of the House by persistently and willfully obstructing its business, or otherwise, the presiding officer shall direct the attention of the House to the incident, mentioning by name the member concerned. The presiding officer shall then call upon a member of the government to move that the honorable member for and pointing out the respective constituency be suspended from the service of the House. And the presiding officer shall forthwith put the question, no seconder being required, and no amendment, adjournment, or debate being followed. If the offense has been committed in a committee of the whole House, the chairman shall forthwith suspend the proceedings of the committee, and as soon as the House has resumed, report the circumstances to the House and follow the procedure provided by paragraph 4. If a member is suspended under any provision hereof, his suspension on the first occasion in any meeting shall continue for 1 day, and on the second occasion for the 2 days, and on the third or subsequent occasion for the duration of that meeting and the subsequent meeting. Not more than one member shall be named at the same time, unless several members present together have jointly disregarded the authority of the chair. A member who is suspended under paragraphs 4 and 6 or is directed to withdraw under paragraph 2 shall forthwith leave the House and its precincts. If any member who has been directed to withdraw or has been suspended under this standing order refuses or neglects to obey the direction of the presiding officer in that behalf, the presiding officer shall call the attention of the House to the fact that recourse to force is necessary in order to compel obedience to his direction, and that member named by him as having so refused or neglected to obey his direction shall thereupon, without further question put, be suspended from the service of the House during the remainder of the meeting or for 10 days, whichever is the longer. If resort to force is necessary, the presiding officer may suspend the sitting during the removal of the offending member. A member who is directed to withdraw or who is suspended under this standing order shall not be entitled to attend the sitting from which he was directed to withdraw, or in a case of suspension, to attend any sitting or enter the precincts of the House until the termination of his suspension. On receiving from a member suspended under the standing order a written expression of regret, the presiding officer shall lay it before the House, and it shall be entered in the minutes of the proceedings. On a motion being made for the discharge of the order of suspension, the question thereupon shall be decided without the amendment or debate. If the question is agreed upon, the order shall be discharged and the member readmitted. In the case of grave disorder arising in the House, the presiding officer may, if he thinks it necessary, adjourn the House without question put or suspend the sitting for a time named by him. Nothing in this standing order shall be taken to prevent the House from proceeding against any member for any breach of order not herein specified. Honorable members, at times, requests have been made to allow the use of Hansards the official report of this Parliament in certain court cases. I have taken this is not allowed, and there are reasons. It is precedent set down centuries ago. The House never loses its absolute privilege. There is no such thing as a waiver of parliamentary privilege. The official report, the Hansard, cannot be replaced by the court by another report. It is neither a substitute for tapes, nor are the tapes a substitute for the Hansard. The official report of the Parliament is sui generis. And you know I'm not a Latin-speaking person. And not an alternative to other documentation. The report is prepared under definitive principles and are not arbitrary or whimsical and are set out in published literature. It cannot be altered by order of a court. It cannot be inquired into or challenged by a court. The Hansard never loses its absolute privilege. It is set down in the Commonwealth in law and convention that the proceedings in Parliament should not be impeached or questioned in any court or any place, for that matter, out of Parliament. This prevents proceedings in Parliament from being examined, questioned, or used to support causes. We must bear in mind the centuries-old convention that no civil or criminal proceedings may be instituted against any member in respect of spoken or written words to the House or a committee. Convention and law says no evidence in relation to debates, minutes of evidence, any document, proceedings or examinations before the House or a committee is admissible in any proceedings before a court or to a person authorized by law to take evidence unless permission has been given by the Speaker. The strength of this traditional position of the Convention is to protect the institution of Parliament, to prevent issues or conflicts with the courts, and to avoid the risk of any ill-conceived attempts to use Parliament's proceedings for wrong private purposes. It also ensures a considerable level of formality and conformity in concepts of evidence and prevents skirmishing with the Parliament. Also, it is not apparent in what circumstances audio and/or video of proceedings of the House or the committee can have probative value in court use together with or instead of the official Hansard's report, nor can any proper purposes be served in using audio or video to supplement or contradict the official Hansard's report to impact any legal proceedings unless the tapes are the official Hansard reports and permission has been given by the presiding officer. An official report of the Parliament on the release of Hansards is not prepared for use as evidence in a court of law or anywhere else, nor is it other than what it sets out to be, substantially the verbatim report, nor will it ordinarily contain everything said by every member during a sitting of the Parliament. Only the member called by the chair to speak has the floor and should be and will be recorded. The official report is evidence of what was said and as reported in the Hansard. It cannot be used to prove anything else, is useless to establish truth of its contents, and is a legal record of a sitting. We do not allow the Hansard to reproduce comments from a sitting position. A member's comments are recorded in the Hansard if he or she has been called upon to speak by the chair, or if he makes a remark that is subsequently picked up by another member and used in the debate. But a remark from the sitting position is not reproduced in the Hansard unless we are in committee, and although it may be broadcasted, it is not part of the official report. When members say things when not called upon, they are not reproduced in the Hansard. A member may request it for use in the Parliament, to prove what was said because it could have been heard in broadcast and needs to be addressed. A member has that right, but the Speaker has to give consent. A member must direct his or her speech to the questions under discussions or to a point of order. The precise relevance of an argument may not always be perceivable, but a member must speak to the matter at hand, nothing else. A member who persists in irrelevance or tedious repetition may be directed by the Speaker to discontinue his speech and resume his seat. Conversations by members near each other should be done in a whisper. This chamber is a very confined area, and loud voices do distract the members speaking and members who want to hear. When the House is sitting and a member wishes to enter the chamber, they should bow to the chair. On taking their seat, they should again bow to the chair. If a member wishes to leave their seat, they should bow to the chair. And if they wish to exit the chamber, they should bow to the chair. And I should say to you that a nod of the head is sufficient. A bow from the middle is not necessary. It is not anything else but recognizing the chair. A bow or a nod of the head is sufficient. Whenever the Speaker rises, there must be silence, and any member who is speaking or offering to speak should immediately sit down. Members should not leave their seats while the Speaker is addressing the House. They should not leave their seats while the Governor is addressing the House on the throne speech. If a member persists in standing after the Speaker has risen and refuses to resume his seat when directed by the Speaker to do so, he must withstand the order of suspension or can be named. I direct your attention to the 24th edition of Erskine May for your knowledge of the orders that will be directed against misconduct, some of which I have mentioned already. Committees and witnesses of committees may be subject to Section 9 and 12 of the Parliament's Immunities, Powers and Privileges Law and can order any person to attend the committee to give evidence or produce documents in their possession or control. Section 6(1) of the Immunities, Powers and Privileges Law specifically says in reference to witnesses being notified by summons, any order to attend, give evidence, or produce documents before the Parliament or a committee shall be notified to the person required to attend or produce documents by a summons under the hand of the clerk issued by the direction of the Speaker. Section 8(1) and 2 of the law states, and I quote, 8(1) where any person ordered to attend, give evidence or produce any paper, book, record or document before the Parliament, refuses to answer any questions put to him or to produce any such paper, book, record or document on the ground that the same is of a private nature and does not affect the subject of inquiry, the chairman of the committee may report such refusal to the Speaker with the reasons thereof, and the Speaker may thereupon excuse the answering of such questions or the production of such paper, book, record, or document, or order the answering or production thereof. Section 8(2), where any person ordered to attend, give evidence, or produce any paper, book, record, or document before any committee refuses to answer any questions put to him or to produce any such paper, book, record, or document on the grounds that the same is not of a private nature or is of a private nature and does not affect the subject of inquiry, the chairman of the committee may report such refusal to the Speaker with the reason thereof, and the Speaker may thereupon excuse the answering of such question or the production of such papers, or audit, or record, or document, or audit, answering or production thereof. Section 9(1) and 2 of the law says, and I quote, every person summoned to attend, give evidence or produce any such documents before the Parliament or a committee is entitled, in respect of such evidence, the disclosure of any communication or the production of any such paper, book, record, or document for the same rights or privileges as before the Grand Court. Section 9.2 says, except with the consent of the governor, no public officer shall produce before the Parliament or a committee any such paper, book, record, or document, or give before the Parliament or the committee evidence on any such matter as it relates to or forms part of the correspondence of any civil department or unit or to any matter affecting the public service. All committees of the House are creatures of the House. They are responsible to the House, must report to the House, and abide and operate by powers and rules given by the House. The Honorable Speaker is the arbiter of the rules. The House is the final jurisdiction of the conventions and orders as passed down through ages and centuries to Parliament. No committee can operate outside of these rules. If it does, the Speaker must exert his powers. The final arbiter of the rules is the House, which deems its powers of order to the Honorable Speaker. So to make it clear, the chair of any committee, select or standing, finance, public accounts, whatever, gets its operative works and its authority from the seat of authority, the House, and thus the Speaker. As Speaker of this Honorable Parliament, I'm responsible and I will ensure the conventions and rules of parliamentary democracy are abided by each and every committee of this Honorable House and member, of course, hoping that I will have complete good behavior. Honorable members, the standing orders are here for your use. You must use it to aid you in your work. As a long-standing member here, I can't tell you how many times I've had to resort to the full standing order to ensure I got my work done. Particularly in the old days when they just thought we were here to say nay and aye and not to do anything else. I had to prove I'm elected. Therefore, I must work, and I will try to work within the standing orders. And I should say that in my 36 years now, I've never been put out. Had some rough times, but I sailed close enough to the wind to get the people's work done. And that's what you must, and why you must study your standing orders, because there are times you will have to sail close to the wind. And being a long-standing member, I will recognize that, but I will also exert the powers within the standing orders. I'm sorry to have taken your time, so much time this morning on these matters, but seeing that we were not able to have yet our conference for new members, I thought it appropriate, since we were beginning a very important piece of business today, that I should remind members to my left, who have been here for some time, and to my right, some of you who are new, and some of you who are also here for some time, that the orders need to be obeyed. Not the Speaker so much, the orders. Thank you kindly.
Presentation of petitions.
None.
Presentation of papers and of reports. Cayman Islands Government 2022-2024 Strategic Policy Statement, July 2021. To be laid on the table by the Honorable Minister of Finance and Economic Development.
The Honorable the Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the government, I beg to lay on the table of this Honorable Parliament the Strategic Policy Statement, otherwise known as SPS, for the 22 to 24 financial years.
So ordered. Is the Honorable Minister speaking there too?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Chris. Mr. Speaker, the government's 22 to 24 Strategic Policy Statement, otherwise known as the SPS, outlines the government's fiscal plans, its policies, and broad priorities and outcomes for the next 3 years for the period 1st of January 2022 to 31st of December 2024. This SPS will also guide the development of the detailed budget for the next budget period, which will cover the financial years 2022 and 2023. That budget, Mr. Speaker, will be brought to this honorable Parliament in November of this year. Mr. Speaker, this SPS is the first one produced by this administration, and it accords with both the principles of responsible financial management and the terms of the framework of fiscal responsibility, otherwise known as FFR, as set out in the Public Management and Finance Act. Mr. Speaker, the SPS also reflects this government's goal of improved fiscal prudence while creating an environment for economic growth and PAC government. Governance, Mr. Speaker, that is people-driven, accountable, competent, and transparent. Mr. Speaker, this SPS is built on the PAC government making the necessary steps to making people's lives better in meaningful ways. The PAC government has crafted this SPS on strengthening our pillar industry of financial services, rebuilding and improving our tourism industry following the devastating impact of COVID-19 pandemic, and diversifying our economy through new and developing industries. Over the next 4 years, the PAC government's key priorities and broad outcomes are: 1, improving education to promote lifelong learning and greater economic mobility. 2, ensuring equitable, sustainable, and successful healthcare system. 3, providing solutions to improve the well-being of our people so they can achieve their full potential. 4, strengthening good governance for more effective government. 5, supporting climate change resilience and sustainable development. 6, increasing social justice in the workforce. 7, utilizing sports to enhance the lives of our people. 8, building a modern infrastructure to ensure a successful future for our islands. 9, improving our financial services as an industry, product, and economic driver for our islands. And lastly, Mr. Speaker, number 10, improving our tourism industry as a product and economic driver. Mr. Speaker, over the next 3 financial years, the Economics and Statistics Office have forecast that our economy is expected to recover over the near term, beginning with a growth of 1.2% in this year, 2021. Economic activity is expected to further accelerate by 4.7% in 2022 and an average of 2.9% between the years 2023 and 2025. Mr. Speaker, it should be noted that while most industries are expected to contribute to growth in 2021, led by construction, some industries, such as hotels and restaurants, along with transport and storage, are not expected to grow, as the islands continue to enforce measures that ensure the safety of our people, and in particular, our children and other vulnerable groups. Mr. Speaker, the economic growth, which is led by the construction sector, will be directly influenced by several large construction projects from the private and public sectors, including the NCB Hilton Hotel, the new Hyatt Hotel at the Pageant Beach site, the Indigo Hotel, completion of the John Gray High School, completion of the long-term mental health facility, and continued road network expansion and upgrade. Mr. Speaker, this government has made it a policy priority of ensuring that Caymanians have meaningful participation in the workforce, and expect that this policy will shift the labor market dynamics and minimize the impact of displacements on the overall employment figure. We believe that this policy will result in more Caymanians being employed and will result in an overall unemployment rate moving from a forecast of 5% in 2021 to 4.4% in 2022, and then average 3.6% in the remaining 3 years. Mr. Speaker, the Consumer Price Index, or CPI, which measures the change in retail prices, is expected to increase by 2.1% in 2021, by 1.9% in 2022, and 2% in 2023, and by 2.6% in 2024. These forecast changes are primarily driven by forecasts in the United States, the principal market for which the Cayman Islands import most of its consumer products. Mr. Speaker, despite the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the government's financial performance and forecast financial results, along with the government's response to ensuring the health and safety of the people of the Cayman Islands and stimulating the local economy, the government remains committed to maintaining fiscal prudency and expects to be in full compliance with the principles and the FFR throughout the SPS period of 2022 to 2024. Mr. Speaker, I will now highlight the financial forecasts that are contained in the SPS document. Operating revenues, Mr. Speaker, this SPS does not contain any new fees or taxes levied on the public. The forecast assumes the ongoing successful prevention of the transmission of the virus and are therefore more dependent on assumptions about future developments than normally is the case. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, operating revenues are expected to increase over the forecast period, surpassing pre-COVID-19 levels. As the tourism sector begins to recover, other major sectors of the local economy are showing tremendous resilience and growth, led by the expansion of the construction sector. Such growth is expected to result in increased demand for goods and services, thereby driving revenue from import duties and other consumption-based revenue items. Mr. Speaker, the government's total operating revenue for the SPS forecast period 2022 to 2024 is just under $2.7 billion, which are broken down as follows: $868.7 million in 2022, $895.8 million in 2023, and $930 million in 2024. Mr. Speaker, the main drivers of these revenues are other companies' fees, $387.5 million, other import duty, $449 million, private fund fees, $152.5 million, partnership fees, $240.4 million, and mutual fund administration license fees, $150.5 million. Taking a look, Mr. Speaker, on operating expenditure forecast, the SPS forecast period is to be just under $2.6 billion in operating expenditures, broken down as follows: $843.2 million in 2022, $861.5 million in 2023, and $864.8 million in 2024. Mr. Speaker, the modest increase in operating expenditures is due to government new initiatives for education, health, security, and social development, coupled with increases in health insurance premiums. Mr. Speaker, the finance costs are expected to decrease over the SPS forecast period, primarily due to the repayment of government debt. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, output from statutory authorities and government companies, or SAGCs, show small increase over the SPS forecast period. Dominant among these expenditure categories are the costs of services produced for government by the Health Services Authority, the Cayman Islands National Insurance Company, the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority, and Cayman Airways. Mr. Speaker, over the next 3 financial years, the government is committed to $434 million in planned capital investments and capital injections. Government ministries, portfolios, and offices are expected to spend approximately $331 million to fund the following: completion of all phases of the John Gray High School in Georgetown, as well as other critical education infrastructure, invest in a new submarine communications cable system, security improvements to the prison facilities, procurement of patrol vessels for the Coast Guard, specialized equipment for the Royal Cayman Islands Police Service, modernization of local infrastructure, including the road network, and the purchase of lands for national environmental conservation, to name a few. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, over the next 3 financial years, the government expects to inject capital totaling $103.3 million into SAGCs to support their operations and to fund capital projects. The majority will be invested in the Cayman Islands Airports Authority, the National Housing and Development Trust, the Cayman Turtle Center, the University College of the Cayman Islands, and Cayman Airways. On the subject of borrowings, Mr. Speaker, in 2021, government intends to borrow $230 million and a further $100 million in 2022. The total borrowings of $330 million will be used, along with operating revenues, to fund capital investments by government, which total $331 million, and government investments in SAGCs of $103.3 million over the SPS forecast period. During the SPS forecast period, the government is expected to pay off approximately $145.5 million in outstanding government debt. At 31st of December 2024, it is forecast that the government will have a debt balance of $398.8 million, which will represent around 7% of GDP, one of the lowest in the world. Mr. Speaker, the government is committed to maintaining full compliance with the principles throughout the SPS forecast period. On the subject of operating surplus, Mr. Speaker, the Act requires that the government maintain a positive operating surplus. Throughout the SPS period, the government is projected to remain in compliance with the requirement to maintain a positive operating surplus. The operating surplus of government is forecast to be $25.5 million in 2022, $34.3 million in 2023, and $65.2 million in 2024. The Act also requires, Mr. Speaker, that the government maintain a positive net worth. The government is forecast to maintain a positive net worth throughout the SPS forecast period. Net worth is forecast to be $1.3 billion at the end of 2022 and $1.4 billion at the end of 2023 and also $1.4 billion at the end of 2024. Mr. Speaker, the Act also requires that the annual entire public service debt service cost, that's interest and principal, not be greater than 10% of government's revenues. The government is forecast to remain compliant throughout the SPS forecast period with debt service ratio of 8.2% in 2022, 8.6% of 2023, and 7.1% in 2024. Again, Mr. Speaker, all years are below the 10% requirement. The net debt ratio, Mr. Speaker, is that the Act requires that the government net debt does not exceed 80% of government operating revenues. Net debt is calculated as the total amount of outstanding government debt plus the risk-weighted debt of SAGCs less the liquid assets of government. For the SPS forecast period, net debt is forecast to remain well below the limit, achieving full compliance with this ratio. In 2022, Mr. Speaker, we're looking at 26.5%, 29.4% in 2023, and 30.7% in 2024. Again, well below the 80% ratio. On the issue of cash reserve, Mr. Speaker, the Act requires that the government have liquid cash reserves of not less than 90 days of estimated executive expenses. This ratio is calculated at the point in a financial year when government's liquid cash reserves are expected to be at their lowest, typically 31st of December each year. Over the SPS forecast period, unrestricted cash reserves are expected to be 167.1 days of executive expenses in 2022, 125.2 days of executive expenses in 2023, and 94.3 days of executive expenses in 2024. Again, Mr. Speaker, above the 90-day requirement. Mr. Speaker, I am very pleased to inform this Honourable Parliament that the UK Government's Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, the FCDO, has agreed to the SPS that has just been laid on the table for the Government's 2022 to 2024 financial years. This is an important and significant endorsement of the Government's plans. Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I would like to lay on the table the FCDO's agreement to the SPS and also read it into the record. I have your permission?
So ordered.
You give that to the Speaker for me, so I'm going to read it. And you can lay this one for me. I know that while you're here, I brought copies for everybody too, in case they want to read along. There you go. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this letter was sent to the Honourable Premier, Wayne Panton, was dated the 13th of July, 2021, and it was from Paul Chandler, Director of the Overseas Territory. And the letter reads, Dear Premier Panton, I am writing in response to your letter to Lord Ahmad on 6th of July, 2021, requesting approval for your 2022 to 2024 Strategic Policy Statement, SPS, and associated borrowing proposals. On behalf of the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, FCDO, I am content that the Cayman Islands Government, CIG, can present the SPS to the Cayman Parliament and proceed with the proposed borrowing plans. As the SPS forecasts, the CIG government will remain in compliance with the 3 borrowing limits set out in the framework for fiscal responsibility. These do not require formal approval from the UK government. I thank you for the transparent and collaborative approach you have taken in sharing this information with us. I would be very grateful if you could continue to keep me and my team updated with the latest fiscal outturn and projections. If subsequent fiscal forecasts project a breach in any of the borrowings limit, formal UK approval would be required for updates to the SPS and new borrowing from that point onwards. Despite the fiscal challenges that COVID-19 has brought, the SPS demonstrates a commitment to sound public financial management and shows the CIG's public finances in a strong position. It is particularly notable that you have maintained a high level of reserves and are anticipating returning to an operating surplus by 2022 under these difficult circumstances. Thank you for your continued collaboration with the UK. I have recently taken over as Director of the Overseas Territories Directorate and look forward to meeting with you in the near future. Yours sincerely, Paul Chandler, Director, Overseas Territories. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in closing, I just want to highlight that the safety of the people of the Cayman Islands and the recovery of this economy are the top priorities of the PAC government. The government recognizes that difficult decisions have to be made to counter the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, but the decision must be made with prudent fiscal limits. Simply put, Mr. Speaker, we have to be responsible with the people's money. The financial target sets out in this SPS allows for funding of key policy initiatives, including enhancing education programs, expanding and modernizing healthcare, enhancing social development program, sustainable development, understanding climate change resiliency, and supporting the financial services sector of being a mainstay economic driver in the Cayman Islands. The government recognizes that setting these financial targets are not just simply numbers, but that these targets affect the lives of our citizens at a personal level. Mr. Speaker, we're talking about a child having daily meals at school, or a person having access to adequate, quality health care. Mr. Speaker, this government remains steadfast in its commitment to delivering its programs of improving the quality of life for all Caymanians while balancing the need to manage the country's finances in an accountable, competent, and transparent manner. But most importantly, Mr. Speaker, being people-driven and making sure that we put people first. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Office of the Auditor General, Cayman Islands, Annual Report, 31st of December 2020, providing value to the people of the Cayman Islands, to be laid on the table by the Chairman of the Standing Public Accounts Committee, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to lay on the table of this Honourable House the annual report for the year ended 31st of December 2020 for the Office of the Auditor General, entitled Providing Value to the People of the Cayman Islands.
So ordered. Is a member speaking there at all?
Very briefly,
Proceed.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the annual report contains the audited financial statements for the Office of the Auditor General for the year 2020 as well. Draw to members' attention the fact the accounts are audited by Baker Tilly, and they did issue an unqualified or unmodified opinion on those financial statements on March 24th, 2021. I commend the report to this Honourable House. It contains a lot of detail as to the work of the Auditor General. And with those comments, sir, thank you.
Cayman Islands Law Reform Commission, Annual Report number 16, 1st of April 2020 to the 31st of March 2021, to be laid on the table by the Honourable Attorney General.
The Honourable the Attorney General.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave of the House of this Parliament to lay on the table the Cayman Islands Law Reform Commission report, which covers the period 1st April 2020 to 31st March 2021.
So ordered. Is the member speaking there at all?
Mr. Speaker, save and accept to draw honourable members' attention to the chairman's forward, where he made a point that this is the 16th annual report of the Commission, and that the reporting period took place in the midst of a daunting challenges for these islands and the world due to the COVID-19 global pandemic, which few could have foreseen. And he observed, Mr. Speaker, that despite those challenges, it has been a progressive year for the Commission. According to Mr. Speaker, as in previous years, the Commission continued to keep the laws of the Cayman Islands under review in a systematic way by maintaining a record of possible future law reform projects through its own assessment of the areas in need of reform, and of course having received referrals from other stakeholders. Mr. Speaker, according to the Chairman, the Commission has maintained concentration upon its core work, and with the result that during and post the shelter-in-place legislative requirements, a range of projects, all of which have direct bearing on the needs of the contemporary Cayman Islands society, were advanced. He made a point, sir, that on the 8th of November 2020, the final report of the Commission was submitted, which deals with bullying and legislation policy, or both. That was the title. And the final report contained recommendations which sought to respond to the issues that relate to bullying behavior in the public and private schools. And of course, the report was submitted or underpinned by an Education Amendment Bill 2020 and Anti-Bullying School Regulations 2020. Mr. Speaker, he also highlighted, and this Parliament would have been aware, of the review of litigation funding in the Cayman Islands as it relates to conditional and contingency fee agreements, and also the decriminalization of suicide, and those, of course, culminated in legislation being passed by this Honourable Parliament. Mr. Speaker, he finally mentioned also the Commission's work, or ongoing work, and the contempt of court report, and also on the issue of the Registered Land Amendment Bill as it relates to the enforcement of mortgage types of security over real estate in the reform of law, the necessary reform to that law. So, Mr. Speaker, I would only further wish to thank the chairman of the commission, Mr. Hector Robinson, Queen's Counsel, and the commissioners, Honorable Justice Alexander Henderson, QC, retired judge, Commissioner Vaughn Carter, Commissioner Abraham Topple, the Solicitor General, the Director of Public Prosecutions, as well, Mr. Speaker, as the Commission staff, the Director, Mr. Jose Griffiths, Paralegal, Ms. Felicia Connor, and Administrative Secretary, Ms. Lourdes Pacheco. And, Mr. Speaker, I therefore commend this report to the Honorable Parliament and to the wider public. I thank you, sir.
Ombudsman Cayman Islands Annual Report 2020 to be laid on the table by the chairman of the Select Committee to oversee the performance of the Office of the Ombudsman, the Honourable Minister of Home Affairs, Youth, Sports, Culture and Heritage.
Honorable the Minister of Home Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Select Committee that oversees the Office of the Ombudsman, I beg to lay on the table the 2020 Annual Report from the Ombudsman's Office.
So ordered. Is the Honorable the Minister speaking there too?
No, it's okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
(2019) Annual Report, Ministry of Community Affairs. 2020 Annual Report, Ministry of Community Affairs, to be laid on the table by the Honourable Minister of Investment, Innovation and Social Development.
The Honorable the Minister of Investment, Innovation, Social Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move to lay on the table of this Honorable House the 2019 Annual Report of the Ministry of Community Affairs and also the 2020 Annual Report of the Ministry of Community Affairs.
So ordered. Is the Minister speaking there too?
Very briefly, Mr. Speaker, just to say that as a twist of fate, I happen to be a member of the Ministry of Community Affairs at the relevant time that's reporting for that period as the Deputy Chief Officer, and I would just like to thank all of the staff at that time for their incredible work. It is integral to the social fabric of this society in terms of needs assessment, in terms of social work, gender affairs. It was a pleasure to work with them, to see their work in action, and I would just like that to be noted for the record.
Government of the Cayman Islands, Children and Youth Services, Keys Foundation, Annual Report for the year ending the 31st of December 2020, to be laid on the table by the Honourable Minister of Investment, Innovation and Social Development.
The Honorable the Minister of Investment, Innovation, Social Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to lay on the table of this Honorable House the Annual Report of the Children and Youth Services Foundation, so styled and entitled, or short name KEYS, the annual report for the year ended 31 December 2020.
So ordered. Is the Minister speaking there too?
Very briefly, Mr. Speaker, to say thank you to this foundation for their incredible work in handling troubled teens and working alongside the Department of Children and Family Services. It's very noble work, and they do so with very meager funding. So thank you for their services.
Ministry of International Trade, Investment, Aviation, and Maritime Affairs, Cayman Islands Government, Annual Report 2020, to be laid on the table by the Honorable Minister of Investment, Innovation, and Social Development.
The Honorable the Minister of Investment and Innovation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to lay on the table of this honorable House the Ministry of International Trade, Investment, Innovation, and Maritime Affairs of the Cayman Islands Government, their annual report for 2020.
So ordered. Is the Minister speaking there too?
Just very briefly to say that that ministry in the middle of 2020 of dealing with COVID had to convert its operations to deal with a COVID response and not their original intended objectives. And I just want to be noted for their outstanding work during the pandemic.
Cayman Islands Government Office, UK, Annual Report 2020, to be laid on the table by the Honourable Minister of Investment, Innovation, Social Development.
The Honorable the Minister of Investment, Innovation, Social Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to lay on the table of this honorable House the Cayman Islands Government Office, UK, Annual Report 2020.
So ordered. Is the Minister speaking there too?
Just very briefly, this report again is a twist of fate, as was one in which I'm deeply familiar with, as at the time I was the Cayman Islands representative to the UK, on which this report is reporting on. I would say that, not in relation to myself, but to the overall staff complement, it was extraordinary to watch Caymanians overseas assist their fellow Caymanians, students, vulnerable, transport back and forth on BA between London and Cayman, and to also have received and helped folks who were leaving Cayman to arrive in the BA, also doing so while they were in lockdown themselves in their residence, was extraordinary to watch. My heart goes out to the staff. I will never forget their support. A piece of me will always be in London. Thank you.
Board of Governors, Annual Report 2018, the University College of the Cayman Islands, to be laid on the table by the Honourable Minister of Education.
The Honorable the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to lay on the table of this Honourable Parliament the 2018 Board of Governors Annual Report.
So ordered. Is the Minister speaking there too?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Only to say that the University College Board of Governors report for 2018 received an unqualified opinion from the Auditor General, and it was during that year they saw the recruitment of the new president.
Water Authority of the Cayman Islands and Water Authority of the Cayman Islands 2018 Annual Report. Water Authority of the Cayman Islands Annual Report 2019, to be laid on the table by the Honourable Minister of District Administration and Lands.
The Honorable the Minister of District Administration and Lands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to lay on the table of this Honourable Parliament the Water Authority of the Cayman Islands 2018 and 2019 Annual Report, and to also indicate that they received unqualified opinions.
So ordered. Is the Minister speaking there too?
Mr. Speaker, just to thank the awesome board at the Water Authority and to publicly express the government's appreciation for their year-upon-year successes with a very vital commodity here in the Cayman Islands, especially with the expansion to Cayman Brac and the work that they're doing there in the plans that they have for Little Cayman, and also to recognize the passing of one of the members, Mr. Chris Randall, to thank his family for his valuable contribution, to also put on record the government's expression of gratitude and appreciation to the most recent chairman, Mr. Carney Gomez, and also to Mr. Alfonso Wright. Mr. Alfonso having tendered his resignation because he's been graduated from a public officer to a civil servant, and Mr. Carney Gomez tendered his resignation after the last election due to, in his opinion, the catastrophic result of the election.
Financial statements of Segregated Insurance Fund of the Cayman Islands for the 18-month period ending the 31st of December 2017. Financial statements of Segregated Insurance Fund of the Cayman Islands for the year ended 31st of December 2018. Financial statements of Segregated Insurance Fund of the Cayman Islands for the year ended 31st of December 2019. To be laid on the table by the Honorable Minister of Health and Wellness.
The Honorable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg today to lay before the Honourable House the audited financial statements of the Segregated Insurance Fund for the fiscal years ending 31st December 2017, 2018 and 2019.
So ordered. Is the Honorable the Minister speaking thereto?
No, I wish not to. Thank you.
Annual Report 2019, Delivering Outcomes That Matter, Health Services Authority, Cayman Islands, to be laid on the table by the Honorable Minister of Health and Wellness.
The Honorable the Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg today to place before this Honourable House the annual report for the Cayman Islands Health Services Authority for the 12-month period ending 31st December 2019.
So ordered. Is the Minister intending to speak?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Questions, Honorable Ministers and members of the Cabinet?
There are no questions.
Statements by the Honorable Ministers and members of the Cabinet.
There's no statements.
Personal explanations,
There are none.
obituary and other ceremonial speeches,
None.
raising a matter of privileges,
There are none.
government business, motions. Government motion number 4 of 2021-22, strategic policy statement for the 2022-2024 financial years. To be moved by the Honorable Premier, Minister of Sustainability and Climate Resilience.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I rise on behalf of the government to move government motion number 4, 2021-2022, the strategic policy statement for the 2022-24 financial years. Mr. Speaker, the motion reads, whereas Sections 23.1 and 23.1A of the Public Management and Finance Act 2020 revision states that the strategic policy statement for the next budget period shall be presented to the Parliament by a member of the Cabinet appointed by the Cabinet to do so on behalf of the Cabinet for approval within 2 months And in a year where there is a general election, the strategic policy statement shall be presented to the Parliament not later than 3 months after the date of the general election. And whereas the next budget period is with respect to the 2022 and 2023 financial years, and whereas the strategic policy statement tabled during this meeting of the Parliament satisfies the legal requirements to encompass a 3-year time frame, and presently this time frame involves the 2022 to 2024 financial years, be it now therefore resolved that the Parliament approves the policy priorities, aggregate financial targets, and financial allocations set out in the 2022 to 2024 strategic policy statement as the indicative parameters on which the 2022 and 2023 budgets will be formulated.
Question is, be it now therefore resolved that the Parliament approves the policy priorities, aggregate financial targets and financial allocations set out in the 2022-2024 strategic policy statement as the indicative parameters on which the 2022 and 2023 budgets will be formulated. Honorable the Premier.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, 3 months ago today, the people of the country peacefully exercised their democratic right in the general election when 17,404 citizens of the Cayman Islands turned out to have their voices heard and elect a new administration to lead the Cayman Islands for the next 4 years. 1 week after polling day, we stood in this honourable House and on the precincts of Parliament and took our oaths as members of Parliament and ministers of Cabinet. Not right now. Yeah. To serve the people of this great country, Mr. Speaker. And on that day, I was given the great honour and privilege to take my oath as Premier of the Cayman Islands. Today, Mr. Speaker, I have the honour and pleasure of presenting to the country some of the details, really adding to those perhaps presented earlier by the Honourable Minister for Finance. And where it repeats, sir, it's probably because it bears emphasis, as one of our famous politicians said in the past. So today I have the pleasure of presenting to the country some of these details of the PAC government's policy plans and proposals and the financial projections for the upcoming 3 years in the 2022 to 2024 Strategic Policy Statement, or SPS. Mr. Speaker, the SPS is a roadmap, if you will, to the government's broad budgetary policies and does not delve into the grit of the budget details, which will come later this year. But, Mr. Speaker, importantly, the revenue forecasts reflected in this document do not include any new revenue measures during the SPS period. The forecasts assume the ongoing successful prevention of the transmission of the COVID virus and are therefore dependent upon assumptions, more dependent upon assumptions about future economic conditions. Revenues, Mr. Speaker, are expected to increase over the SPS forecast period, surpassing the pre-COVID-19 levels. As the tourism sector begins to recover, other major sectors of the local economy are showing tremendous resilience and growth. The expansion of the construction sector is expected to result in increased demand for goods and services, driving additional revenue from import duties and other consumption-based revenue items. And despite the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the government's financial performance and forecast financial results, the government remains committed to maintaining fiscal prudency and being in full compliance with the principles of responsible financial management as prescribed by the Public Management and Finance Act, or PMFA, throughout the SPS period. Mr. Speaker, I wish to commend the men and women of the PACT government for their day-to-day running of the government and attention to core public sector activities. We came together to not only develop this SPS, but also to set clear key strategic policies. As you would know, sir, the PACT government took over administration of the Cayman Islands after the snap general election in April. And since the day of swearing in, we have hit the ground running. As a team, we are growing from strength to strength on a daily basis. And keeping foremost in our vision our guiding principles of being a government that is people-driven, accountable, competent, and transparent. Our collective goal is to responsibly improve the quality of life for this and future generations of Caymanians. Broadly speaking, our vision is of a Cayman that is held up as one of the most sustainable countries in the world, where all of its citizens can thrive, a country that is a peaceful and prosperous place and known for its resourcefulness, its diligence, its excellence, and its innovativeness. Mr. Speaker, before I speak to the SPS, I will address a couple of matters of importance for the record of this Assembly of Parliament. Mr. Speaker, we have before us two looming issues of importance to the nation: the reopening of our borders to travelers to help us boost our economy, and the recent spate of gun crimes. I'll start with the latter, Mr. Speaker. If we do not address the crime problem head on, there'll be nothing here for visitors to want to comfortably enjoy. Mr. Speaker, you and others would know that I am at heart an optimist. It is at times like these that I recall the words of that great American baseball pitcher, Leroy Satchel Paige: never let your head hang down. Never give up and sit down and grieve. Find another way. And don't pray when it rains if you don't pray when the sun shines. We're having some sprinkles now, Mr. Speaker. It's now that we as a nation need to be doing some praying as a part of the solution. Friday night, I sent a message to the nation saying that I was grieved and saddened by the shocking outbreak of recent gun crimes. Mr. Speaker, we have seen two more young Caymanian men shot down in the prime of their lives. And to what end? The only thing these acts did was leave loved ones devastated. The Royal Cayman Islands Police Service has been resolute and robust in their response to these crimes, and we salute the Commissioner and his team for facing these challenges head on. The National Security Council has also adopted measures to fight gun crime, and we continue to meet to come up with other strategies. Mr. Speaker, I'm keenly aware that the social ills, such as inequity and disenfranchisement, that has led to this subculture of gun possession and criminality didn't emerge overnight. But this government, I want to clearly state, is committed to addressing the deep-rooted issues as a matter of priority, and that is something we will focus on over the next 4 years. Mr. Speaker, the second challenge facing us since taking office was and still is the safe reopening of our borders to visitors. Since taking office, we have turned much of our attention to the COVID-related regulations we inherited from the previous administration. Some of these regulations have been extended and some have been amended, Mr. Speaker. We also extended the pensions holiday, the tourism workers stipend, and the health insurance continuation program, because these programs provide and initiatives provide essential relief for our people and businesses who have suffered much because of COVID. I reiterate my appreciation to the former administration for getting us through the hard days of the COVID lockdown. Now, Mr. Speaker, we have a plan to reopen our borders, but nothing we come up with will work safely unless everyone in the Cayman Islands who is capable of taking the COVID vaccine takes it. We must realize the goal of vaccinating 80% of our population, and we will continue to use the population figure of 71,100. Mr. Speaker, I'm begging everyone in this country who have not yet taken the vaccine, not from a position of weakness, but from a position of concern for the health of this country, to help us reach our goal. We cannot remain closed to the outside world forever. We have to let people come back into our country to help us rebuild, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, ours is a phased plan based largely, once again, on the vaccination numbers. It is a topic I will continue to emphasize until we reach our goal. At any point, our plan can be pulled back, but that decision will be based on assessments at each phase. These assessments will be based on medical science and data. It could be that as we welcome people back into our islands, we may have to go back to wearing masks in certain circumstances again. We may have to get back into the habit of social distancing in certain circumstances. We may again also lower the limits placed on the numbers of people allowed at public gatherings, depending on the current advice and circumstances relevant to public health. We have to remain cautious, Mr. Speaker. I think we only need to look at our fellow overseas territory, the British Virgin Islands, as an example. When I spoke at the Chamber luncheon, legislative luncheon last week, I told the audience that BVI had to enact harsh restrictions because the number of COVID cases at that point was 480. I think it had gone from near zero to 480 in the space of 1 week. As of this past Monday, Mr. Speaker, that number had, in their chief medical officer's words, grown exponentially to 1,147. 2 people have died, and 4 people are in intensive care. There, Dr. Ronald George said, and I quote, "I must appeal to everyone's understanding that the BVI is now in an advanced state of community transmission, and therefore all persons are presently at risk of contracting COVID-19. Those are words, Mr. Speaker, I do not want to hear our Chief Medical Officer, Dr. John Lee, repeating. We don't want those sort of words in these islands. And by the way, Mr. Speaker, of the 18 hospitalizations for COVID in BVI since the 4th of July, 17 of those patients had not been vaccinated. If current trends continue, the BVI could see as many as 5,500 cases in the next 2 weeks. That's according to their national epidemiologist. Mr. Speaker, that would constitute, as much as it would for us, a public health disaster. We do not want this happening in the Cayman Islands. So once again, Mr. Speaker, I'm imploring those listening, those watching, if you haven't been vaccinated and you are able to, please do so. Do not wait. The lives of our people are at stake. The livelihoods of our people are at stake. In fact, for each individual, their lives may be at stake personally if they are unvaccinated. Mr. Speaker, I think people should not let those spreading misinformation deliberately or inadvertently mislead them. The vaccine is safe. Billions of people have been vaccinated safely. And yes, the vaccine has been approved. Do not listen to the mischief that it is not approved. Do not listen to the mischief that it is some grand experiment. The reality is, it is the only real solution we have to regaining some degree of normalcy with open borders while still protecting the health and lives of our people. We have said it before, and again it bears repeating, Mr. Speaker. Nothing is of greater importance to me and my government than the well-being of our people. We have worked tirelessly, deliberating diligently, and seeking to strike the right balance for the safe and successful reopening of our broader economy, including specifically tourism. As I said earlier, Mr. Speaker, everything we have done has been based on our guiding principles, being a government that is people-driven, accountable, competent, and transparent. It is those guiding principles that have led us to develop our broad outcomes for this SPS. At the heart of those broad outcomes is one critically important thing, Mr. Speaker, and that is improving the lives of our people. Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Minister of Finance and Deputy Premier articulated those broad outcomes. I will do so again, just to emphasize. Firstly, improving education to promote lifelong learning and greater economic mobility. Secondly, ensuring an equitable, sustainable, and successful healthcare system. Third, providing solutions to improve the well-being of our people so they can achieve their full potential. Fourth, strengthening good governance for more effective government. 5, supporting climate change, resilience, and sustainable development. 6, increasing social justice in the workplace, in the workforce. 7, using sports to enhance the lives of our people. 8, building a modern infrastructure to ensure a successful future for our islands. 9, improve our financial services as an industry product and economic driver for our islands. And lastly, but certainly not least, improve our tourism as an industry product, and added economic driver. Mr. Speaker, when this government met to discuss our goals and ambitions for this SPS and the country's future, we all agreed that education is a top priority, and we drilled down on what needed to be done to ensure that the next generation and those that come after are well equipped to lead our country. We believe, Mr. Speaker, that education is the most worthwhile investment of our country's precious resources. Mr. Speaker, many people may be shocked by the new reality that one of the issues we face is that of hungry children. And study after study has shown that hungry children are poor students. They have poor cognition and educational performance. They are more likely to repeat a grade, come to school late, or miss school altogether. We know for a fact we have children who come to our public schools who have missed meals. Mr. Speaker, I have spent time with some of the parent-teachers associations and the incredible parents that have been engaged with those, all spending their own personal time trying to ensure that these types of issues have been addressed. And I see the frustration, I see the concern on their faces, and I share the need with them to have this issue addressed. So, Mr. Speaker, this government has as one of its goals to continue to improve education, beginning with a basic step, to ensure that all of our children are fed, giving them the foundation to earn a great education. For some time, there was a policy of the Education Ministry that no child goes hungry. The time for talk is over, and now we are backing that policy with resources. We also plan to increase offerings in public high schools to allow for the reintroduction of A-levels, expand the scholarship age limit for postgraduate degree programs, and incentivize Caymanians to continue lifelong learning by upskilling themselves. I'm pleased that the Honourable Minister for Education agreed to join our government, Mr. Speaker, and to serve for the first time in recent history as a consecutive Education Minister. I believe, Mr. Speaker, this provides continuity and an opportunity to see better outcomes from improved policy approach. Mr. Speaker, there is no greater indication of our government's focus on health than the request of the Honourable Member for Health, Minister for Health, to have our ministry renamed the Ministry of Health and Wellness. Strengthening our healthcare system comes with a healthier population. To ensure we build a successful and sustainable healthcare system, we will incentivize Caymanian medical professionals to return home to work, move to a more efficient health services authority where all clients will experience less waiting time, and we will revamp Cynical, expanding services. Our elderly and aging population, Mr. Speaker, can also count on a government that will help establish additional assisted living homes and retirement facilities through public-private partnerships that meet their needs. And, Mr. Speaker, I will say specifically for the benefit of the member from East End, that will definitely include East End, as it will all other districts and constituencies. Mr. Speaker, as I've said on many occasions, the PAC government wants to create in Cayman a country where all of its citizens thrive. We want to provide solutions to improve the well-being of our people so they achieve their full potential in our society. We will offer full support to the family system and communities by providing financial assistance to help working families offset the cost of daycare services and increase the number of recreational parks, civic centers, and multipurpose halls. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, we have heard the voices of our people loud and clear. Therefore, our government, and this goes particularly to young people in this country, Mr. Speaker, who feel that their opportunities are fast disappearing. We will offer government-guaranteed home-assisted mortgages, more quality affordable homes, and we will enact legislation to reform the current pension system to provide greater retirement protections. We will reform work permit fees. We will end dependency on cheap labor. We will increase labor enforcement and increase the minimum wage with an eye towards a workable solution. As we work, Mr. Speaker, to continue to improve the lives of our people, we need to take a hard look at social justice in the workplace. We believe we should establish a national job criteria list to reduce the number of misleading employment ads, as well as implement a system to match all work permit applications to unemployed Caymanians with the relevant skills and experience. There should also be a joint approach between work and the Ministry of Education to match available jobs to new graduates. Mr. Speaker, our Deputy Premier and Honourable Minister for Border Control and Labour has his fingers on the pulse of the employment of our people. We need to have a healthy community of people who will take up these jobs. And as such, the PAC government encourages a culture in our community of being active through public education campaigns, the promotion of academic opportunities through sports, and ensuring that sports development is funded to enhance the lives of our people. Our Honourable Minister for Youth, Sports, Culture and Heritage is very passionate about this area, Mr. Speaker, and he is keenly aware of the power and role that sports plays in bringing or bridging the social divisions and differences, in building a stronger, more active and connected community. Mr. Speaker, you've also heard me say very often that if we do not do enough to take care of our environment, that we will have nothing left for our people or our visitors. This government is serious about supporting climate change resilience and sustainable development. Most importantly, we are committed to reviewing and revising the National Development Plan, without which we are just paying lip service to future generations. I thank my government colleagues, Mr. Speaker, for supporting me bringing in a new ministry focused on sustainable development and climate resilience. Moving on, Mr. Speaker, our government sees us reducing the number of second-hand cars that are imported from Japan and promoting the use of electric vehicles in the public transport system. There should be stiffer fines for environmental violations, and mangrove buffer zones that have been damaged should be replanted. We also need to do a better job of educating our children and the wider public about our environment and the negative effects of climate change on every aspect of our lives. In order to have a sustainable environment, we have to also turn our attention to a modern infrastructure to ensure a successful future for our islands. A planned successful future includes public education and consultation on national infrastructure development, the provision of money for a new subsea fiber optic telecommunications cable to ensure we remain connected to the world, and an effective national stormwater management plan that includes remediation of chronic flooding areas. These are all things, Mr. Speaker, that our Honourable Minister for Planning, Agriculture, Housing and Infrastructure is passionate about. To realize all these goals, Mr. Speaker, we have for our people and country, we need to ensure that our two major pillars of the economy, the financial services industry and the tourism industry, are protected and allowed to flourish. But we also need to look at other industries for growth, such as technology, healthcare, and medicine, amongst others. In short, Mr. Speaker, we must continue our efforts to diversify. We must redefine how we position the Cayman Islands as a tax-neutral jurisdiction, promote compelling initiatives to debunk tax haven myths, engage proactively with international political and regulatory organizations, and network with key European Union, United Kingdom, and United States stakeholders. Our Honourable Minister of Financial Services and Commerce is working hard with our stakeholders to keep the Cayman Islands at the forefront of the global financial services industry. We also know, Mr. Speaker, that we have to regrow. Pardon me. We have to regrow and reimagine our tourism product to be competitive. We will do this through the better use of data by policymakers to ensure the approaches that we take are sustainable and effective. So, Mr. Speaker, we will do this through the better use of data by policymakers to ensure the approaches we take are sustainable and effective. These will be based on a revamped national tourism plan, diversification of our tourism product with a greater ecotourism focus, and rethinking how cruise tourism can best serve the Cayman Islands. The Honourable Minister for Tourism and Transport, Mr. Speaker, brings energy and passion to his two focus areas. And I'm confident that we'll see more Caymanians joining, growing, and prospering in the tourism industry during this administration. Mr. Speaker, we're not working in silos. All of our ministers are being ably supported by our parliamentary secretaries who have uppermost in their minds our ambitions and goals. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, I mustn't forget that all of these goals that I have mentioned, that I've outlined, those that have been mentioned by the Honourable Minister for Finance, all apply equally to the entire Cayman Islands, and I specifically want to emphasize in relation to our wonderful sister islands of Cayman Brac and Little Cayman. We want to see growth. We want to see educational opportunities there. We want to see an approach of sustainable development there. We want to see opportunities there for the people of our sister islands. So all of this applies to the entire country, Mr. Speaker, lest there be any doubt. Mr. Speaker, at the heart of all of our decisions is good governance, which in turn leads to more effective government. Shortly, we will create fully functioning constituency offices, work to implement district councils, introduce compliance officers for each ministry, and implement a code of conduct for both Parliament and Cabinet. Frankly, Mr. Speaker, this is all going to take careful allocation of money. So I'll go over some of the financial highlights of the SBS. Operating revenues, which total $2.7 billion over the SBS period, are driven by the continued strong performance anticipated in the financial services sector and the local real estate market. Together with the planned full reopening of the Cayman Islands borders to stayover tourism in November of this year. Fees from the financial services sector are expected to contribute revenue of $1.1 billion over the 3-year period ending 31st December 2024. Operating expenditure, which totals $2.6 billion over the SPS period, will be used over the next 3 years to fund our key priorities. The government is forecast to maintain positive operating surpluses of $25.5 million, $34.3 million, and $65.2 million in 2022, 2023, and 2024, respectively. Government is forecast to maintain cash balances of $441.7 million, or 167.1 days of executive expenses in 2022, $352.5 million, or 125.2 days of executive expenses in 2023, and $291 million, or 94.3 days of executive expenses in 2024. The reason for the decrease in days over time, Mr. Speaker, is that government intends to utilize the established $330.5 million line of credit to help fund forecast capital expenditure. This borrowing was a provision made by the last administration based on the anticipated devastation to the economy from the COVID-19 pandemic. It was a reality no one wanted to face, but one that is still looming large. Again, I thank the past administration for their foresight and for the banks that agreed to lend this or provide this facility to the Cayman Islands government. Core government's debt balance is forecast to be $499.1 million, at 31st December 2022, $446.4 million at 31st December 2023, and $398.8 million at 31st December 2024. Mr. Speaker, these are just some of the highlights of this SBS. We will know more about the country's finances when we return to Parliament later in the year to discuss the budget. But what I will tell members of this Honourable House and the public, Mr. Speaker, is that the recovery of the Cayman Islands economy and the safety of the people are our top priorities. At this point, we recognize that choices have to be made within prudent financial limits to help counter the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Mr. Speaker, this government remains steadfast in its commitment to delivering its program to improve the quality of life for all Caymanians while balancing the need to manage the country's finances in a people-driven, accountable, competent, and transparent manner. Mr. Speaker, I thank the Deputy Premier and Minister of Finance and Economic Development, the Financial Secretary, and their entire team for their ardent work in putting this SPS together. We will gather again soon to work diligently on the budget. I also thank all members of my team and the wider civil service who had a hand in this strategic policy statement for the period 2022 to 2024. Your dedication to this country, and our people is profound and much appreciated. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Question is there another member wishing to speak? Is there another member wishing to speak? The Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as Leader of the Opposition, I have not had the opportunity to have a sight of the speech that the Minister delivered, the Premier delivered. I'm just going to ask if there's any possibility he could take the lunch break, give me a chance to consider that, and to deliver my remarks afterwards.
I'm sure that the government will agree that it's a fair request. And so we will take the luncheon break at this point to come back at 1:15. Okay. Some members are indicating that they will need a bit more time because of quite a bit of other matters going on. So 2 o'clock, the House will adjourn until 2 p.m.